Hi guys, can you hear me? Okay, I think I'm live now. Just give me 1 minute, guys. Yeah, I think I'm live now. So I just wanted to tell you and explain the percentile because there were so many people who had many doubts with respect to how it was working. I'll tell you one of the questions that people are asking is why is it in slot 3 LRDA the scoring is getting downscaled at lower scores. So I'll tell you how the percentiles work. I'll also tell you what are the possible issues that are there with our own percentile predictor, which I think is going to happen, is possible that it might happen this year. But let me explain again in detail. So the way percentile and normalization actually works is it looks at people who have scored one standard deviation from the normal. What does it mean? It means that every person in slot 3, if you can find out the mean of all the people who have scored some marks in slot 3. Once you score it, you can look at one standard deviation from the mean. That is basically around, say, 18 percentile. Roughly speaking, if you're looking at somebody who has scored around 68 percentile, because one standard deviation from the mean is around 68 percentile. Now, anybody who has scored around 68 percentile will get no or very little scaling. The scaling, however the scaling might be in that particular slot, that person will not get a lot of scaling. It will be very close to zero. Anybody who is getting more than 68 percentile will get the benefit of scaling. And at the extremes, the benefit will be higher. Similarly, people who have scored less than 68 percentile will get less marks. They will be downscaled. And again, as they're scoring lesser and lesser, the downscaling also will increase. This is basically how the scaling system will work. This is basically based on the algorithm or the formula that CAT uses to normalize. So basically, they look at one standard deviation from the normal, and there is basically how much ever you are deviating from it, your scaling will be affected similarly. What we have noticed is this time in the last, I've been doing this scaling for the last 6 7 years, but this is the first time it has so happened that one slot people scored much better in LRDA as compared to the remaining two slots, which was LRDA in slot 2. So because it was completely skewed, because people did extremely well in LRDA and slot 2, the scaling for LRDA across different slots was impacted much more than usual. But I feel that after scaling was done, the scale scores overall, if you look at even the toppers list, now it seems much more fairer in the sense that now earlier without scaling, nearly everybody who was the topper was from slot 2. Now, after we put the scaling, you can see that the distribution of toppers from slot 1, 2, and 3 is more or less uniform. So this is basically what scaling tries to do. I'm not going to say this is fair or unfair or whether this is a good way or a bad way, but this is basically the formula that they use to give. So again, just to reiterate, if you have scored less than 1 percentile, that is less than 68 percentile, you will be downscaled in slot 3. If you have scored above 68 percentile, you will be upscaled. The one thing that I would actually tell you, which might benefit you, which is something that we might have gotten wrong this time, is with respect to that one standard deviation. Basically, when we are figuring out what exactly is 68 percentile, is something that we might have gone wrong because we have only around 50,000 response sheets, and the total number of people who have taken the examination is 2.5 lakhs. So what we are actually saying as 68 percentile might be different. So whatever we are using for that data of 68 percentile might be different. So it is possible that the actual 68 percentile might be lesser. So you might have been around the 68 percentile, but we are counting you as less than 68 percentile because of the data skewedness. And again, this is something that might happen this year only because, like I mentioned, the variance of scoring across the slots in any particular section was extremely very, very different this year. And it has not happened any time earlier in whenever I was doing this scaling. That is one of the reasons we delayed releasing the percentiles so much, because we were running it multiple times, but we could see that the percentiles were, the scores across the three slots were very, very different. So just to ensure that that was correct, we were doing it multiple times. But still, I will tell you that, okay, the 68 percentile mark or whatever we assume to be 68 percentile mark might be different, but the formula, we have just followed whatever CAT has given. Slot 3 mark should increase. So basically, like I mentioned earlier, slot 3 scaling will be better for people who have scored above 68 percentile. Below 68 percentile, there will be downscaling. But what is 68 percentile? I might be wrong. So what is 68 percentile might be wrong, because of which it is possible that some people might not get scaled as badly. And I'll tell you why I can be wrong. I can be wrong because I have only data of around 45 to 50,000 people. In a normal year, that is more than sufficient for me to give a very accurate percentile prediction. This time, because of the variance, very high variance in LRDI, it is possible that I might have made some. I don't think might have made mistakes. I'm saying that it is possible that the data might have been skewed. Slot 3 raw score 28. What is the percentile? Slot 3 raw score 28. Basically, it depends on each of the sections, right? I don't know how much you scored in each of the sections. After how many more responses, फिर कब से update करोगे upscaling? Uh, I'm looking at updating it after 60,000. This time, basically, I want some more data and I will come back to it. But it might take me 3-4 days. Uh, Once we get 60,000, 65,000, and I will also think about what is the right way to do it, and I will get back to you. Basically, I want 2-3 more days to actually think about it because I have to figure out the data part. This was not an issue earlier because most of the sections used to be similar difficulty. So whatever assumptions I made would get cancelled out. This time, because slot to LODI was very easy, it was affecting the scaling for everything. Slot 1 was the hardest. I don't think slot 1 was the hardest. If you're looking at people who are looking to score around 80 percentile, I think slot 1 will get upscaled in verbal. Those things I already mentioned, right? So whenever I'm talking about upscale or downscale, like I mentioned yesterday, it is mostly for students who are scoring around, say, 80 to 90 percentile. Those are the guys who have scored better than the 68 percentile. So when I talk about upscaled or downscaled, it is mostly for them. And I think that is basically what we showed today also. Okay, I'll... one other question people had about log question. Log question, many people are saying log question is wrong. I didn't check it, unfortunately. I was busy with this percentile things. So log question we assumed is basically 2 as the answer, even though it can be changed to 0. We, as of now, for now, because we didn't want too many complications, we assumed the answer to be 2, which is what is given. But I think we will submit a objection. Let me check it, and if it is actually 0, then we will do a objection. Are you saying 68 percentile across section in slot 3? No, what I'm basically saying is anybody who has scored above that one standard deviation. One standard deviation is approximately 68 percentile. Anybody who has scored above 68 percentile will definitely get upscaled. Anybody who has scored below 68 percentile will get downscaled. This is for slot 3. Why has slot 3 been downscaled today? No, I think, Ronak, I was just talking about it. For everybody, the scaling will be different. People who have done well, they will get upscaled more. By well, I mean anybody who has scored above 70 percentile, 68, 70 percentile, will get more marks. What is the standard deviation in slot 2? The percentile will be the same for everyone, man. That standard deviation, one standard deviation is always 68 percentile. I hope we will also release one more video, which I've recorded like before the response sheet has come, which will give you a better understanding of how normalization actually happens so that you can understand it better. But if you have any, sir, is this because margin is very close this time as once it was doable for everyone? Okay, somebody asked this question. That is a good question. I'll tell you one of the things that is different this year as compared to earlier years. This year, I think LRDA of slot 2 was based on just the data of how people have done. Okay, I think people have scored much higher in LRDA slot 2 as compared to slot 1 and slot 3. That is one. Secondly, even more importantly, I would say that the toppers, that is the 0.1 percentile in LRDI in slot 2, have done much better than the toppers in slot 1 and slot 3. So CAT considers these two things. How well have the toppers done as compared to the 68 percentile guy across the 3 slots? Now for LRDI slot 2, those toppers have done extremely well, which has basically ensured that a lot of normalization has been impacted with respect to all the 3 slots. And this, I think, to this extent, it hasn't happened anytime earlier. That is, one slot was, first of all, much easier than the others. And in that easy slot, I think the toppers have done extremely well. So both of these things combined, the effect has been much more. Yeah, many people actually said that slot 2 was very difficult, but based on the data, I don't think that is true. Will slot 2 scale down further? I don't think slot 2 will get scaled down further. In fact, I would say slot 2 was not getting scaled down as much. Wait, you're saying everyone doesn't get upscaled? Yeah, man, everyone won't get upscaled. That's what I'm telling you. No, it depends on whether you have scored above 68 percentile or not. Which slot was the toughest? Again, I would say which slot was the toughest. If you really ask me, I think maybe slot 3 was the toughest. Based on just the data. I haven't seen the paper of any one of the 3 slots, but just on the data. So people who have scored less in slot 3 will get downscaled according to you. Yeah, I think that will happen. By less, I mean anybody who has scored less than 8 marks or so, I think will get downscaled. This is my opinion. I might be wrong. I'm telling you again that I have only like 45,000 or 50,000 response sheets. So it is possible that I can be wrong. Can this be possible that slot 2 this year contains all the toppers like slot 3 of earlier years? I don't think it is just based on having some toppers, to be really honest. What I actually think happened is the paper was easy. And whenever the paper is easy, toppers tend to do well. And when the paper is difficult, toppers cannot do very well. So basically, if you look at it this way, I think the reason it happened is if you have an easy paper, a easy to medium paper, a smart guy would score very high. A good student would score very high. And a medium student would score also high, but not as high. Essentially, what I'm saying is, for example, if you're looking at quant, if the paper is very easy, not very easy, say medium level, easy to medium, then you can see a lot of these toppers will score 60 marks out of 66. And a normal student would score around, say, 25 marks. So the difference is 35. Suppose the paper is very difficult, like in CAT 2023. Then the topper will score 45 marks. And the average student will score, say, 18 marks. Now the difference is much lesser. The difference is only 27. Earlier it was 60 and 25, so the difference is 35. So basically, when the paper is easy to medium, it will really benefit the good student much more because they will be able to really score a lot, which is what I think has happened in LRD of slot 2, where I think, again, I haven't seen the paper, just on the basis of the data I'm telling you, where I feel that it is possible that the toppers have done very, very well. So the topper has outscored that normal student, that standard deviation one, that is 68 percentile student, by a lot in slot 2. In slot 1 and slot 3, because I think the paper was much tougher, the topper was not able to score as high. So the difference between the topper and the standard deviation one guy, who is the 68 percentile, is not much more. That difference is much more this year as compared to earlier, where in one slot, the toppers have outscored the 68 percentile guy much more. Sir, there is an objection. We are very sure. Okay, I want to know. Somebody wants about a VRC question. VRC, I'm not so sure, man. Again, I don't want to disappoint you. In my experience, I've seen that whenever we pose any objection for VRC, it is always like rejected. But we will check that if right now we are just busy with the response sheets and all. But maybe maybe after tomorrow, we will see. Sir, is 68 percentile overall or sectional for standard deviation? Basically, one other thing you have to look at is scaling is done only per section. All the sections are scaled individually. That is, quant is scaled differently, LRD is scaled differently, verbal is scaled differently, and the overall marks is basically the sum of all the scale scores. So scaling is always individual according to one particular section. So the 68 percentile that I was talking about, one standard deviation, is basically individual with respect to sections. Why does it work like that? Because someone is from bio background was in slot 3, we won't even get upscale in quants. I don't know why it is like that. I thought about explaining this in an intuitive manner, but I couldn't figure out the right way to explain it in an intuitive manner as to why that is the case. But I know that is the case because you can just look at that formula. It is given in the IMCAT website. Any further scaling possible in quants for slot 1? I think quants, there won't be a lot of scaling, man, upscaling or downscaling. The big scaling is happening only in LRDI. And to an extent, I think verbal in slot 1. Some extent, verbal in slot 1 also is getting scaled. there is positive scaling for verbal slot 1. So again, if you have done well, you'll get upscaled a lot, and if you have not done well, you'll probably get slightly downscaled. This is for verbal slot 1. If a person has scored lesser in one section and good in other two, will the lesser scored section be scaled on more for that person? No, it is independent of how that person has scored in the other slots. Like I mentioned, scaling is according to one section. So your scaling in verbal is independent of how you scored in quant and LRDI. Your scaling in a particular section is only dependent on which slot you are in and how people have done in that slot, in that particular section. -10 scale down in slot 3. -10 scale down in slot 3, then I think you have scored already maybe like 1 or 2 marks. Because -10 scale down is very tough, man. I don't know what you actually scored. Can you tell me how much you scored? Yeah, somebody's asking, will you do the scaling again after more response sheets come? Yeah, I will definitely do the scaling again because, like I mentioned, this time I was not very comfortable with the scaling because, like I mentioned, one of the section is just so different from the others. So I also wanted to do it. We took a lot of time to actually release the percentiles because I wanted to get comfortable. I think we have done a decent job. But still, I think I want to do a better job. So I will upload the response sheets. I will do the scaling again after some more response sheets come. And I also want to take 1 or 2 days to think about how to actually look at this problem because the data is very different this time as compared to earlier times. So whatever assumptions I used to make earlier, I think might not work this time. So I'll have to think about one more time and we'll release the updated percentiles in some time. Basically, I didn't want to do all of these things because I wanted to, the reason we released the percentiles was also because I wanted to end the anxiety and the uncertainty. I wanted to do it. That is the reason I don't want to say too many things because I just feel that if I say more things, you'll just get more anxious and uncertain, which I don't want. But I'll just tell you one thing that we will, right now, we have released a percentile, which I think will be fairly okay. But I think we can do a better job, which I think I will release maybe after 4 or 5 days. But still, like I mentioned, I think the trend of what we are saying is definitely correct. The trend of which slot is getting scaled up, which slot is getting scaled down, what is the rough percentile. I think most of them are correct. But in that 68-70 percentile mark, I think we can improve. So that is something I want to work on. So basically, somebody who has scored 99.1, I think can be completely fine with what we are predicting. Somebody who has scored above 90 percentile in all the 3 sections can be completely fine with what we are predicting. The only problem which I feel is with respect to people who are around the 70 to 80 percentile mark, based on what we are predicting, I think there we might have messed up. So I wanted to again get more data and then do a revision there. Yeah. The percentiles are only based on what data we have, nothing else. The percentiles, we are only looking at whatever data we have independently and we are making assumptions based on it. I'll just take another 1 or 2 questions and then I'll end the stream. Sir, I have one question. In the data now present, after 51,000 data, the mean and median of slot 2 DLR is less than slot 3. So why is it scaled down so much? I'll tell you basically what I see. Okay. What I see is the mean and standard deviation. But then you have to look at the toppers. Maybe we'll add one more table we'll add about how the toppers have done in LRDI. Okay. The toppers, according to me, if I'm considering like say the top 50 guys in LRDI in slot 1, slot 2, and slot 3. The top 50 guys in LRDI in slot 1 have scored around 38 marks. The top 50 guys in LRDI in slot 3 have scored 38 marks. The difference is 0.5. 38.7 for slot 1, 38.1 for slot 3. It seems roughly the same. But the top 50 guys in LRDI in slot 2, they've scored 51 marks. That is such a big difference. And this kind of a difference I've never seen before. Because of which many of the scalings have gotten affected. Earlier, it would be that the topper scores as compared to others would be slightly different, maybe by 2-3 marks here and there. This time, the difference is 13 marks. If you're looking at the average of the top 50 scores in LRDI across slot 1, slot 2, and slot 3. Okay, guys, that is it now. We will release some more information that we have so that you'll get a better understanding. And we'll also update the percentile predictor maybe after another 3-4 days once we cross maybe 60,000 response sheets.